It's my great pleasure to welcoming you all to this World Resource Forum workshop on the local impacts of mining, innovative tools to measure them and enable a constructive stakeholder dialogue. I welcome you on behalf of the Responsible Mining Foundation and of ETH Zurich, which is the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology. My name is Fritz Brugger. I'm the co-director of the Center for Development Cooperation at ETH. In this workshop, we focus entirely on primary resource extraction and on the impact that this has on the local development at mine site level. This is where extraction happens on a daily basis, and it is where communities live. Mining, as you know, is a disruptive business. It creates pressure on the environment and on natural resources. And it also creates high expectations among the local population for jobs and for other opportunities. The question of who gets the benefits and who carries the environmental and social cost of mining frequently leads to dispute or even conflict. And this is all well known, and we will not elaborate on the many issues that cause conflict, nor on why it is in the interest of companies to avoid the cost of conflict. Instead, we present 3 tools that assist local stakeholders on the grounds: communities, mining firms, local NGOs, and local governments, as well as academia, to engage in constructive dialogue with the goal to improve the development outcomes in mining areas. The basic idea behind the 3 tools is to bring transparency to the mine site level. Such mine site level transparency about how mining affects local development is the next frontier of responsible resource governance. And it is a prerequisite for a meaningful dialogue between extractive firms, communities surrounding mining areas, and local governments. The first tool that we present is the Resource Impact Dashboard, or in short, the RID. It's the result of an ETH research project. It's a tool to monitor the many social, environmental, and economic aspects of local development over the entire life cycle of a mine. The second tool is the Mine Site Assessment Tool, or the MSAT. This was developed by the Responsible Mining Foundation as a response to requests from their local stakeholders. And the MSAT facilitates engagement, and it does this by empowering local communities and putting them into the driving seat. The third presentation explores whether citizen science can be a useful approach to create evidence on environmental issues, and to what extent it can empower local communities in settings which are often characterized by limited capacity. All 3 tools have in common that they are really created, made for local actors, and they also have in common they are readily available to be used. One last remark before we start. We take questions in written form throughout the event, and if you want to send a question, please use the Q&A function of Zoom. The button is located at the bottom left of the application if you are on a computer, and in the upper right corner if you are using a smartphone. With that, we jump into the first tool, and I invite Felicitas Fischer to introduce the RID. Felicitas is a researcher at ETH, and I invite you to start your presentation.
Thank you, Fritz. Yes, and welcome everybody as well from my side. My name is Felicitas Fischer, and I am going to introduce you to the Resource Impact Dashboard, which is an online available and free to use and also free to expand tool to measure local impacts of mining. The Resource Impact Dashboard has 3 main features. First, it is holistic. That means that it has quite a comprehensive view on local development. It encompasses economic, social, environmental, and institutional dimensions of development outcomes at the local level. Secondly, it is balanced. That means that it includes different perspectives of different stakeholders. What does that mean? It means that the data that is on the resource impact dashboard comes from 3 different data sources. The first data source is company data. So companies provide their monitoring data into the RID. Those are data on local employment of the company, or on local procurement, tax payment, of course, on their environmental monitoring, and also on their engagements with local communities and social investments. Then secondly, there is a household survey made within a 20 kilometers radius around the mine site. And the household survey includes variables on the income and well-being of those communities, but also on community relations, on levels of trust, and on the perception that the community has towards the company or also towards local institutions. And then thirdly, there is institutional or public data on development outcomes like health and education. Now, by triangulating these 3 data sources, the resource impact dashboard creates a balanced and a nuanced picture of local development impacts. And by doing so, it establishes a common ground for resolving disagreements between communities and companies. So it contributes to a constructive dialogue and to evidence-based policymaking. Then thirdly, it is systematic. That means that it has a standardized methodology, which makes the data that is on the resource impact dashboard comparable throughout over time, and also across different countries. It is free to use, so the threshold to use it is very low, and the methodology is already on there so that stakeholders can actually start implementing the tool at any time. So also at any time of a certain mine site, be it during production or already before, during the exploration state, etc. This is how the tool looks like. On the left-hand side, you can always see a satellite image of the mine site. And then on the right, we have all the different variables, and they're categorized into different categories. For example, there is variables on the company, on well-being and services, like here, as we can see, wealth distribution. So basically, how does the wealth in the area where the mine site is compared to the wealth nationally? And obviously here it's interesting to monitor over time how that develops, right? Because then we can see if a mine site actually contributed to more wealth, to the growing of wealth in the region. Then we have some variables on education and jobs, like, for example, company employment. Who does the company employ? Is it regional staff, international staff, and female or male staff? Then obviously on environment, there are a number of variables. For example, the hazard perception, the perception of communities of environmental hazards. Do they perceive a certain hazard? For example, do they perceive a lot of dust? And also, do they contribute this dust as being made by the company or not? And then also the company gets to share, of course, data on monitoring, for example, on the water quality. And lastly, we also have variables on social capital. As you can see here, those are all variables that are on the community company relation or on the community government, local government relations. For example, on grievance mechanisms, on compensation, but also in general on their support of mining and the acceptance. In this example here, we see that there is generally actually quite a high support of mining, even though there are obviously also many issues with impacts. Then something on information received, and obviously also on consultation. So everything that is really the dialogue between the company and communities. So in a nutshell, the resource impact dashboard tries to answer 2 questions. The first one is, how can we promote better local development outcomes over the entire life cycle of a mine? And the second is, how can we improve basically the quality of how the different stakeholders talk to each other, the quality of conflict? And it follows one logic or gives one answer to that. And this is basically, in order to find a solution, you first need to agree on a problem. So in order to find a solution to maybe development problems or to conflict, you need to first know where impacts can be problematic and can be negative, or where impacts are also positive, in order to then be able to discuss and go forward. So the answer is that the RID provides is with measuring local impacts of mining in a holistic, balanced, and systematic way. You can find the resource impact dashboard online under resource-impact.org. There's also a small video on it, and then you also have material, for example, on its methodology and also on how to apply it. Thank you. With that,
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Felicitas, for sharing how the RID works. And you used obviously real case data. Something we can probably in the Q&A come back to it, the application. You also find the results from these different applications online on the Resource Impact website, Resource Impact Dashboard website. I'm sure this has provoked thoughts and questions on your side as participants. Please remember you can post questions and comments in the Q&A function of Zoom. Let's now turn to the second tool, the Mindsight Assessment tool, and I invite for that Pierre De Pasquale. Pierre is the head of stakeholder engagement at the Responsible Mining Foundation and one of the brains behind this MSAT. Pierre, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Fritz. And thanks everyone for being with us today. I think between Zoom and the World Resources Forum platform, we have just about 100 people in the room, which is great. And I think it's just a perfect segue now for me to talk about the Mindsight Assessment tool, which, I mean, Fritz, you say I'm one of the brains behind, but I think we really acted more as a facilitator in the design process and in the implementation, rather than being the sort of a controlling or mastering a platform behind it. So I work at the Responsible Mining Foundation. For those who don't know, we are an independent research organization based in Switzerland. And we do a lot of stakeholder engagement, where we engage with really the full spectrum of stakeholders, from local level, affected stakeholders, mining communities, workers, trade unions, women's organizations, youth groups, to mining companies, authorities, industry, associations, banks, investors, multilateral organizations. And today I'm talking about the Mindsight Assessment tool, and I will just start very briefly with, if I can change my slide, yes. So what is it? It's just a set of 15 topics with very simple questions that everyone can understand. It's free to use, free to download, free to print. It's using simple language, everyday language, no technical jargon or terms or terminology. It's designed to be easy to use. Like I said, printer friendly. It's already available in, I think, 16 or 17 languages on our website. And really, this is just a simple printer friendly questionnaire, yes/no questions that actually form entry points to start a dialogue with a mining company. And where does it come from? I mean, how did we end up with this tool, like I said, that we sort of facilitated and supported develop with local stakeholders? It's actually the result of requests and numerous inputs from mining affected communities on the ground, and also from workers and trade unions. And really the starting point was, I think, like a bit like Felicitas said, you know, we have problems, but we need to agree on the kind of problems we have, and how do we address it, and how can we engage directly with the mining operators. It's coming also after, I think, a long period of local groups trying to engage solely with governments, either at the local level or national level, without exercising, I think, direct corporate engagement. And there was a sort of a growing need and growing interest in direct corporate corporate engagement. So how could we design and build a tool that will enable a constructive dialogue between local stakeholders and mining operators in and around a mine? So specifically designed for mine site level issues, considerations, not a very, not a high level, sophisticated corporate level tool or, benchmark or survey mechanism. Because at the moment we've seen really a lot of, benchmark, certification schemes, initiative, standards, rating systems that do not pay a lot of attention at the mine site level issues, what's going on at the mine site level, where actually this is, where most of the harm happens and where most of the problems and conflict happen. It's at the mine site level. And especially the idea was to develop a tool that could work for small scale mining, to engage with smaller entities, even cooperative, semi-industrial, artisanal mining. And this tool has been piloted, like I said, it's really a bottom-up approach where local stakeholders have designed a tool for themselves. We've used it and supported its use in countries like DRC, Ghana, Indonesia, the Kyrgyz Republic, Mongolia, Rwanda, South Africa. It's now being used in Tanzania as well, with some very successful case studies. So how to use it really in practice, this set of questions, like I said, very simple questions. For communities and workers, it's really to raise awareness within the community, within the workforce, but also with the mining operators about the most basic aspects of responsible mining. Questions around basic disclosure, environmental monitoring, data sharing with communities, ensuring that there are like sanitation facilities, protection equipment for workers, separate facilities for female and male workers, issues around mine closure, informing communities about the planned closure date of the mine site, and so on. So very basic things. But at many mines, we see that there's a lack of data sharing, a lack of performance tracking, and a lack of collaboration. Definitely, it can be used to start a constructive dialogue. So sort of setting up a set of common ground, common questions on which to engage, to identify gaps, also measure improvement over time if you use it on a regular basis. You can also as well do a survey to compare different sites in the same region or across a country or a subcontinental area if you have more resources and if you're supported by NGOs or bigger organizations. And ultimately, this is aimed at preventing harm and building trust between stakeholders. Similarly, for mining operators and cooperatives, they can self-assess their performance against these basics. They can as well identify gaps, measure improvement over time. We get requests more and more from small mining companies who are interested in using the tool themselves to help them also formalize their responsible practices and stakeholder engagement, to build a constructive engagement, and again, ultimately prevent harm and build trust among stakeholders. I'll stop here. I think we'll have time to discuss more during the Q&A session. So over to you, Fritz.
Thank you very much, Pierre. Very interesting to listen and compare what you just say about this very hands-on tool that you download, you print it on paper and use in the community, while what Felicitas has presented is kind of a dashboard where you upload data and you have them on your laptop or mobile and you monitor it over time. So two kind of different but very complementary approaches on the same questions and topics. Let's now turn to the third approach that we discussed today. It's the question, what is the potential of citizen science in mine site level governance? And Désirée Ruppen has worked on this question during her PhD research at the Institute of Science, Technology and Policy at ETH Zurich. Désirée, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Fritz. So I welcome you all from Biel in Switzerland, and let's directly fly to Zimbabwe, where we have implemented a community monitoring project in a coal mining area. So an area where coal has been mined since over 100 years. And so Hwange is located in the northwest of the country, where you have also the biggest thermal power plant. And the discharges of these industrial activities are reaching the local river downstream of the mining concessions, and you have repetitive fish kills and also a loss of livestock that is reported from the community members. They are worried because some of them even drink that water because of lack of alternatives. It's a semi-arid climate, so it's a lot of pressure on drinking water resources. And with the support of civil society, they've initiated a mediation process with industry and government to put their grievances on the table. And this process came to a halt in mid-2018 because actually no of the stakeholders admitted responsibility. There was a lack of data to attribute clear responsibility to one of those 3 mining companies, and as I mentioned, the thermal power plant that all have effluents that go into the river. And actually in this context, as you can see on the right-hand side on the pictures, we have started to work with community members, so me from ETH Zurich in collaboration with University of Zimbabwe, to take technically sound water samples and measure pH. So the community monitors did that on a weekly to bi-weekly frequency. And in we worked together for around 1.5 years. So the scientists also did some sampling campaigns, and together we gathered close to 800 water samples and a data set that allowed us to identify the specific sources and also the extent of the pollution. I won't go into detail which pollutants were of main concern, but if you're interested, we can talk about that later. So a question that I would like to talk about in the next few minutes is how that scientific data actually impacted the local mediation process. And on one side, we could observe that the community monitors, so not only that we jointly presented that data in these mediation meetings, but the community monitors themselves, they also used the data to visit the industry representatives and also government officials to pressure for the main grievance, which was the drilling of the drinking water boreholes. And some of them actually were drilled, not all the requested one, but there was a clear empowerment of the community monitors using that data. And also it was actionable for them, even though they had very low formal education. And the company representatives themselves, which was surprising to us, they used the data to convince their own top management of the importance of investing in a more resourced unit, the environmental management unit, to get better equipment and so on. And the government officers, especially the ones from the Environmental Management Agency, who is supposed to monitor effluents and to keep the environmental regulation respected, they had some political barriers, especially to deal with the main polluter company, which is a governmental owned company for the majority of the shares. So they used the scientific data generated by the community monitoring scheme to give an order to that company to come up with an action plan. So just to wrap up, I think that the citizen science approach allowed to establish a large data set that was broadly accepted to the different stakeholders, and it was also more extensive than a purely scientific setup where you can make punctual field campaigns, but their community monitors were always able to react if there was an acute pollution event. And some ideas how to build up a successful community monitoring scheme. I think motivation, the intrinsic motivation of the citizen scientists that participate is very important to make it work. So in the context of Hwange, it was their river where they consumed the water. So they had the motivation to be part of a project for 1.5 years. They were not paid. They received some funds to communicate among each other, but they were not paid. And a key issue was also the training that had to be adapted to their educational level, and also an ongoing follow-up from the scientific side to identify challenges in the sampling and potential errors. The communication was very important. So we had these numerous meetings in the field where we transparent very openly between scientists and community monitors, but also all other stakeholders that were involved in the mediation process were aware of the sampling going on, and the results were often shared with them, either in these big meetings or on a bilateral level. And then I mentioned already the training that of the citizen scientists. I mean, we measured water quality with over 23 chemical elements. So there was a lot of laboratory work involved, and this is often a very tricky point, especially in the global south, where the laboratory infrastructure, the local one, is not so developed, and then there is a high cost of shipping that is involved. So for sure, it needs a supporting environment for the whole logistic part of the analysis. And I mean, I mentioned the drilling of the drinking water boreholes. Here's just an example of manganese that at some points it even exceeded 70 times the local and also the international guideline values for drinking water. So in the end, the job is not done with drilling some drinking water boreholes, but we encounter political, let's say that the whole results were not politically backed to really change structurally the environmental management of those companies, because in Zimbabwe, as in many other contexts, it's quite a political capture of the institutions, of the public ones, but also of the industrial players, top-down hierarchies. And so it's very tricky for a bottom-up initiatives that happens on a local level to be fully effective. So we argue that bottom-up initiatives need strong allies to be fully effective, to also pressure from above. And in our research, we have identified that international clients of those mainly local mining companies could be powerful allies. In our interviews, we heard that especially for the local mining companies, their clients are important environmental benchmarkers, so more important for the companies than actually the governmental regulations. So those companies that have procurement principles and like in our case, Nestle Zimbabwe and also Holcim Lafarge were clients of that coal. And they have strong sourcing policies, and they would have an own interest in better implementing those sourcing policies. And we think with allying with some bottom-up initiatives like the community monitoring, they could they could give a high leverage for positive change on the ground. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Désirée, for this third perspective and the potential of citizen science to address environmental issues particularly. Now I want to remind you that you still can ask questions using the Q&A function in the Zoom or also in the other conference tool. We have received a few questions. I want to start just with a question to Désirée that links to your last presentation. It's from Gudrun Franken, and she says, great presentation. How do you think the participation of ETH contributed to the success? Or in other words, would it be also successful and build enough pressure if communities did that on their own?
Thank you, Gudrun, for this I think it is a very important question. We spent some thoughts about that. I think the role of an independent scientific unit was key in this kind of context. So this pollution debate goes on for quite some time. It is highly politicized. And so I think some institution has to take this role of honest broker, let's call it like that. I mean, it could be, and I won't go into detail about a Western like scientific unit in a post-colonial context. I mean, all these things have an influence, I think, on the general debate. But I think even with a local university like University of Zimbabwe, it is important just to have somebody who is not directly involved. I think the credibility would have been much less if the community monitors would have done that only supported by a civil society organization.
Thank you, Désirée. And yeah, the thing that you talk about citizen science also points to the fact that you always kind of try to bring together scientists, academia, be that a local or international university, and local community members to monitor local conditions. There was another question from Carlos. He asks whether these tools also help in obtaining the social license to operate, so which is kind of the corporate perspective on the relationship with mining companies. Pierre, what is your experience on that? You have applied the mindset assessment tool in quite some places.
Yes, no, absolutely. And like you said, I think this is really a sort of corporate perspective to talk about social license to operate. So we need here to think through, I think, the eyes of the companies that have been involved. And we've had, you know, a number of examples, and I'm thinking of South Africa, the Kyrgyz Republic, also in Ghana, where clearly there had been sort of a latent and long-lasting conflict between local communities and the mining operator. So I think in this scenario, you can say there was a sort of incomplete social license to operate, although the company was operating. And this tool has really helped enable a dialogue. So in some cases, some mines in Ghana, there had been no dialogue whatsoever for 10 years between the surrounding communities and the mine. Other examples in South Africa where there had been some discussion at the very beginning and then the dialogue was just broken for a long time. I think it helped re-enable or enable the dialogue. And in a way, this acted as one of the conflict-solving tool that you can add to the toolbox. So it is clearly helpful in building the trust, maintaining the trust, which in other words could be seen as securing the social license to operate in this context.
Thank you very much, Pierre. Felicitas, how does this look like in the case of the RID that also was piloted in a couple of mining areas? What is the company approach in thinking about that you have seen?
Yes, thank you. I think I want to just add on what Pierre has said and kind of like because we see something very similar within the mine sites that have where the RID has been piloted. That has been 3 mine sites in Mozambique and 2 in Burkina Faso, and also there have been some conflictual context in where those mines are operating, especially in the north of Mozambique as well. And the feedback we got from the companies, so also kind of like the reason why they were interested in this tool was exactly what Pierre was also saying, that they are interested in knowing, you know, how their the approval is by the communities. And I mean, the social license to operate basically is an ongoing approval or acceptance of the mining operations, right? So it's, if you mean social license to operate in terms of before a mine site starts, then maybe not, because it's really about the impacts that a mine site has. But if it's really about this ongoing, you know, monitoring of the perception of the communities of a mine site, yes, I think this is exactly a tool where industry representatives or industry, you know, mining companies can, you know, can have an idea and also then know on which topics there might be issues and in which topics they can engage, you know, with the local communities.
Thank you very much, Felicitas. You make an important point, making the distinction between before and after mining starts. While a company receives kind of a license from the government to extract, that's kind of, once you have it, you have it. But the social license to operate is something that you have to continuously earn. So that's kind of permanent volatile status. So that's ongoing. And that's why what you both mentioned, the ongoing dialogue, is probably one of the key things that you have. Would you say, Désirée, that this aspect of the dialogue and in that sense also building trust is something that came out when you deployed this citizen science project?
I think with regard to the trust issues, I mean, in Wange, I mean, there are these official procedures before starting an extraction with the environmental impact assessment, where theoretically also the community should be involved, but in the end, in reality, there's also sometimes there's a quick visit to the village chief, but in the end, the community members, they don't feel involved at any point in these official procedures. So I think with being part then of a project that gives them a voice, where they also I mean, it changed also a bit the footing, because before the government offices or the industrial representatives, sometimes they use vocabulary that the community members, they couldn't deal with. I mean, just to mention an example, pH. The government officer was always mentioning, yeah, the pH is low, the pH is low. And after the community monitoring, the community members themselves, they could use the same terminology, which I think was also possible to then encounter official representatives on another level, and this created trust, because somehow there was a new and more frequent exchange between them, but also more respect. And I think that was important, to feel respected, which makes increases the trust level.
Thank you very much, Désirée, pointing to that imbalance that you very often have at the local level in terms of terminology, knowledge level, but also getting a seat at the table. And what I think all three tools have in common is that they empower stakeholders by giving them kind of they create their evidence, they collect data, which means they have something to bring to the table, have kind of clear understanding of the questions they want to ask. And in that sense, it helps to create a level playing field, I guess. Yeah, there are two more questions I briefly want to address. One is for Pierre. Charlotte is asking about the results, not only the number of reports, but also, do you know anything about the action that have resulted from these engagements?
Thanks, Fritz. I think here, the one thing that I need to mention, and I probably forgot to mention, is I think this tool and our approach is very different from many, I think, governance or community support project, where we really did not aim at conducting a research project, writing a report, and then leaving the area. It's really trying to empower communities on the ground, build capacity so that they can drive their own agenda, they can exercise their own civic space, have their own agency in their relationship with the mining operator. So in that sense, we haven't been gathering, multitude of reports coming back from the local actors, but we have, where possible, followed up and accompanied local actors, and again, facilitating this capacity building work and this awareness raising and engagement with the mining company. So that said, we've published together with ETH, I think a few weeks ago, and I think Fritz sharing the link now in the chat, but we've published a case study that actually goes through the example Désirée presented on the Citizen Science Project, and we shared some practical, tangible successes and feedback from examples of the MSAT being used in Ghana. We are also in contact, like I said, in a number of other countries where we know now that at least in Ghana, in the Kyrgyz Republic, in Indonesia, in the DRC, in South Africa, there has been real improvement on the ground where stakeholders have been able to just talk together, bring issues on the table, look at them from the same perspective, agree on a number of actions, like, for example, in Kyrgyz Republic, the mining company had never, and I'm really talking about very small companies. I mean, I saw in the Q&A, some people are talking about, Vale, Glencore. And here, we're really talking about the thousands and thousands of super small mining company, and some of them had never done water monitoring before. And, thanks to this engagement on the mindset assessment tool, they also realized that it was mandatory by law to do it, but it was just expressed in a simpler language. And now they're doing it. And we've seen also in Ghana how the local authorities have heard of the project and have helped facilitate the dialogue and are now doing more regular inspections on basic things like filling back the abandoned pits to make sure people and animals don't fall into them, securing the areas, providing PPEs and so on. So I don't have a comprehensive number to give you, but we will be publishing soon more case studies about it. Thanks.
Thank you, Pierre. Another question that was raised is regarding the companies using these tools, where there is kind of a particular profile in which companies self-select, where there are kind of typical characteristics for these companies that are interested. Felicitas, can you share anything on that?
So do I understand correct the question? Do companies select themselves if they want to participate in the RID?
Yes, that's one part of the question. The other, is there kind of like a typical type of question that is more likely to use these tools?
Well, to the first one, maybe I would have liked to expand a little bit on who can, which actor can basically participate in this tool, or can companies, do they also select to participate? And I think just a general remark that basically any actor or any organization can initiate this tool, like the RID. So it can be, and we have seen this in the countries where we piloted the project, but also in countries where an implementation, is foreseen. There actually, on the one side, there is, there are community organizations or NGOs that are interested in applying the RID. Civil society organizations in DRC, for example, or in Ghana, were in the lead. In Botswana, we have a university that is interested in applying it to a mine site, which is near a technical university, actually. And also we have, companies interested in applying it and using it. So yes, the answer would be yes. Also, the companies can initiate this process. For example, in Tanzania, we have a company that is interested in applying it in their vicinity. Maybe some minor point, which I didn't mention in my short presentation, that it makes sense to always have an implementing organization that is, and a setup to implement the tool that is also kind of trusted. So it's certainly not a good idea if the company does it everything themselves. So basically, if they organize all the research, if they fund the whole, the data insertion, etc. So it definitely makes sense to have as a leading and implementing organization, an organization that is trusted. This can be a university. Those are usually very much trusted by the different stakeholders, by the communities, but also by local governments and by the companies themselves, by the way. So so this first as a kind of setup on how we can implement and who is implementing the tool, basically. Now, which companies are more prone, so to speak, to join the resource impact dashboard? I think it depends a lot on the context. Generally, those are mines that, I mean, it has been implemented, I have to say, in 4 mine sites, in 5 mine sites yet. So the data is still, or the sample is still very small, but definitely those companies that are interested in knowing what the communities think of them. So basically, there might be already some level of maybe conflict or some issues going on that are interested. And yes, so we have made different experiences. So some companies were very, responsive and very much engaged, and others not so much, especially one company, but that was also during the time of COVID, and they had a lot of issues going on. And there again, the conflict context might also be on the negative side, because that particular mine was in the north of Mozambique, and there was a lot of conflict going on. So it might just have been that they have also a lot of other issues and problems, going on at the moment. So they're not really able to engage in a better, transparency at local level at the moment.
Yeah, thanks, Felicitas. I think you mentioned also the last question that just came in regarding how do you engage in using that. And it's, you have to have kind of an implementing agency that on the ground organizes data collection, and then the RID sets up a new mine and the data can be fed into that. There's one open question. We have 3 minutes to go. There's one open question from a colleague who had to leave, but the topic is still relevant. He asks, often there is also kind of accidents on mine sites. How can you handle that? Environmental access, the bursting dams, for example, or mining legacies, and also kind of impacts further away caused by transport. Désirée, regarding the accidents, probably that's something that, how can citizen science capture that or react to that?
I think so. In the context of Hwange, there's the pollution has different sources. So some like point sources of acid mine drainage, they come from mining legacies, so underground workings that have been abandoned since the 70s and that haven't been properly closed, where you have this very metal-rich acidic water like welling up continuously. And then you have another potential source of pollution. You have these pit lakes all over the area. And there is some illicit pumping sometimes by some of the industrial players. So during the night, or especially after rainfall events, they just pump the water out. So these are then very acute pollution events. And in the end, the community monitoring scheme was a very reactive way of monitoring this kind of impact, because then community monitors, as soon as they saw the pollution going on, I mean, you have directly fish kills, they went to sample the river water. I mean, a scientific unit that is at least 1,000 kilometer distance, like Harare from Hwange, for instance, you cannot have the same reactivity to events. So I think especially to show, because on one of the slides you saw that the concentrations, they have a big range. And you can miss a lot of these acute pollution events if you show up 5 days later. So I think for us, it was very important to show the full range of maximum concentrations. And for that, the community monitoring was key.
Thank you very much for this, Désirée. I think that's kind of probably the tool of the three that can immediately react to document what is going on in an emergency situation, while the others are more kind of focusing on engaging with these with the mining companies and the local stakeholders from government over the longer term. Yeah, so with that, keeping an eye on time, our time is over already. That went quite fast. So I want to wrap up with kind of 3 takeaways from my side. What I think is kind of came out from these initiatives quite clearly. Change, that's the first, happens always on the ground and on mine site where extraction also happens. So you have to be close there and not removed in boardrooms anywhere in the world. And the second, with simple tools and methods to collect data and produce evidence, we can actually empower local stakeholders and local communities for them to get a seat at the table. And the third that comes out from all the 3 presentations, transforming evidence into sustainable solutions. That needs not only agreeing on the problem, but it also depends on finding the right cooperation with other stakeholders, building coalitions and finding synergies. With that, thank you very much for participating in this workshop, and we wish you all an inspiring continuation of the World Resource Forum. Thank you very much and goodbye.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye.